This is day 3 of recording myself to improve my speech. There was a bit of a gap in the uploads because I had semester 5 exams in my undergraduate degree. But continuing on with our journey, we were reading two books simultaneously: The School of Life by Alain de Botton and The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. Following up, uh, in The School of Life, I've read 20 more pages, and this particular section within the subsection of relationships focuses on romantic relationships. The way they've focused in on romantic relationships is particular is by particularly discussing affairs. The author starts off by discussing how the romantic movement has actually misled us a little bit. We would think that our modern day ideas of around sex are very progressive. It's not something we are as shy or puritan about as we used to be back in the day. But all that has really happened is we're still as awkward as ever before, but now we feel the pressure that this should be actually normal. We feel that it should be normal, although we do not, that is not the reality day to day. We're still very awkward around this subject, and this leads to many little problems when it comes to relationships. Now, in discussion of affairs, we have a very simplistic way of thinking about it in the general discourse. There is usually a betrayed party and the betrayer, and the betrayer is morally irredeemable, and the betrayed is supposed to feel hurt and probably moralize and so on. And this, although there is a point to be made, this is the natural reaction, there is something lost in this way of thinking. There's something that is not captured about the whole process, and that is what this chapter tried to analyze. It starts by growing on this idea. Usually, when there's an affair, people start by asking the question, when did it happen? When were the first signs? When was that first party or social gathering or business meeting, etc., where the paramour, the illicit lover, met with our partner? But perhaps this is the wrong question to ask, or the right question but the wrong answer to give. The book offers an alternative explanation by suggesting that it isn't the meeting of the two lovers that the affair starts in. It is all the little details, all the little lack of intimacy moments uh, where one person did not feel heard, one person, when they expressed themselves and when they made themselves vulnerable, were not reciprocated. The author lists down many such examples, some of which I found very relatable. An example of which being neglect, where by the simple fact of a partner being tired, exhausted physically, when their partner expresses something very important to them, you reply with a very generic great, or you forget something that's very important for your partner, and then they have to have this awkward moment of reminding you about this thing that's so important to them, among other things that can happen day to day. Now, individually, these things aren't such a problem, but when they accrete, when they grow, they can lead to feelings of resentment, isolation, and just a general lack of not being accepted. Now, if you're a careful historian of infidelity, as the book puts it, you would be wise to realize that this is the real starting point of an affair, not the meeting, not the business meeting, not the social gathering, not none of that. So really, if we are interested in sustaining a long-term relationship, it would be in our best interest to start at the root cause. Now, here the author gives some suggestions on what we could do to avoid such a thing from happening. And the suggestion is to start with a few prompts that we can answer in regards to us being disappointed with our lovers, or us not being sexually gratified with our lovers, and so on. Along these different dimensions, we need to sit down and think very carefully, and these prompts might help us do that. Besides these prompts, the author also discusses certain skills that are necessary to navigate uh, this particular category of romantic love. One thing which I found to be true in relationships in general is the skill of arguing. It is if we enter a discussion, if we enter an argument with the desire to win, the argument is already pointless with respect to the relationship. What happens really if you win one of these arguments? Well, you might get to feel good, you might rejoice, but what have you really accomplished? You've made your partner wince, you've made your partner feel lesser about themselves, and also that if your focus was winning, there were probably no words or phrases or pats on the back or any signs of reassurance that their partner was heard, that your friend was heard, at least their viewpoint was acknowledged. So knowing how to argue is very important, but secondly, knowing how to pinpoint exactly what it is that is disappointing you in this moment is equally important. We might be we might either suffer from being far too vague in pinpointing what exactly is bothering us, or being so precise that we miss the point. After building on this argument, the author concludes with this: if we think of affairs as not as a person giving into their animal instincts and betraying us by sleeping with another person, but rather as a person who did not feel loved or intimate and therefore seeked that intimacy elsewhere, then it is not so easy for us to point a finger and say, you are in the wrong, and moralize from a high horse. It becomes a very hard, intangible problem to solve. And so we should give up on the idea of pointing fingers and instead try to realize the complexity of the whole situation. Uh, Overall, I found this whole section pretty difficult to read. Difficult not in the sense it was poorly written, it was very well written, but that it required so much thought per sentence, per paragraph. What I've pieced together right now is are parts and pieces that I've arranged and rearranged to make sense of the argument. What I what I want to walk away with, and what I would want you to walk away with, is rather than anything specific, it's an inquisitive nature about something that we think we have the final opinion on, which is affairs. They might not be so simple. That their true diagnosis might actually implicate both partners, and it might really have to do with our need of being needed and our need of being accepted, intimacy, rather than any animal instincts, desire for sexual pleasure, and so on. Okay, moving on to the psychology of money. A comparatively much easier read. It simply talked about, well, the title of the chapter, I believe, is You only have to get it right half of the time. Something like that. It's chapter 6. Uh, it talked about the same concept from a few different angles. Here's my take on it. So there's a thing called the 80-20 principle that's out in common discourse. It's pretty popular. It's a principle that says 80% of your success comes from 20% of your efforts, or 80% of the company's profits are produced by 20% of its employees, and so on. The claim in this book, the claim in this chapter, the proposition, the starting point is that most of your success is going to come up from these tail events, these exceptions, these very rare events that will occur. Uh, it is put in the context of investments, which makes a lot of sense. The example I believe was given that Warren Buffett's success can be attributed to only a very few of his investments. Most of his investments actually haven't earned him much. Is the very small subset that has built his billion-dollar wealth, along with obviously compound interest. Secondly, on top of this, since you can't get it right all the time, but getting it right few of the times, tail events, is enough to sustain yourself. What really matters is not getting it right or wrong, but how much you can earn or profit in any sense when you get it right, and how much you can avoid devastation when you get it wrong. As long as you can do that, you're in the game, you're still playing. And thirdly, from my side, I think this argument can be a supporter for consistency, because since these are tail events, they occur very rarely. How can you make it more probable? If you keep doing it again and again, if you're consistent, a tail event becomes more and more probable. And so there's this virtuous cycle. It's the 80-20 principle. Most of your success is going to rest on these tail events, 80-20. Uh, as long as you can avoid devastation, you're going to be fine. When you fail, that is. And consistency is key. It makes tail events more probable. And this virtuous cycle continues. After reading the chapter, I thought of an example, and that was Mozart. I believe he has composed over 600 pieces in his 34 years of life. And if I were to guess how many pieces were popular in his day, let's say it was 200 or something. And how many are played to this day? My guess would at least be around 50 are super popular. They're played around the world in orchestras, in Vienna, in New York, everywhere. I would say those would be around 50. So that's roughly 8%. Only 8% of your work is incontrovertibly good. And that's when you're Mozart. So in business or in art, there are going to be duds, no matter how good you are, no matter how good you are. But all your laurels, all your success can rest on those few things. How will they come about? Well, consistency. So I guess if were to go back to money itself, when we are investing or we are taking financial risks, it's fine to fail. It'll be okay as long as those failures don't lead to devastation. If we can just get it right a few of the times, that should be enough for a sustainable financial future. Alright, that sums it up. I'll see you guys next time.